Salamun alaikum. Today, inshallah, we're going to discuss a very important question that is often misrepresented and misunderstood. And that question is about what's referred to as the 72 versions in paradise. It's a topic that is salacious, that is contemptuous, and that creates all sorts of problems. And we're going to discuss it according to the methodology by understanding exactly what the Quran talks about with this regard. Now we're going to refer to the word hur. Hur, as you see on the screen, the word hur is spelled ha, waw, ra, and it's spelled in English this way approximately using this special language for pronunciation. And we're going to discuss two of four locations in the Quran. Because of the time, we're limited to discuss only a few references. Now, I ask before we start this video, before you watch, that you watch all the way to the end, and please provide yourself or allow yourself some time and have the patience to try to understand the depth of the meanings of the Quran. As we shall see, the Quran is easy to understand, it's clear. It doesn't mean it's for simple-minded people. It doesn't mean it is for those who want to rush the interpretation of the Quran. It doesn't mean it is for those who want to stay at the superficial layers of the Quran. The Quran is very insightful and its verses are packed with information. As a matter of fact, this is the exact concept that's referred to by the word hur, as we shall see. So we're going to start with chapter 55, which is Surah Ar-Rahman. So verse 55-72 discusses أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم حور مقصورات في الخيام. Unfortunately, it's been translated as virgin women who have been locked up in tents, and this represents really the mind of those who are misogynistic and, to be honest with you, misinformed, or they have their own biases and they have their own intellectual limitations. I don't know how to describe them, as we shall see. The translation, according to the methodology that we use in this channel, and that is based on the Quranic methodology, what we call the organic methodology, is as follows. Scriptural Quranic verses. So hur is a description of the verses, of the Quranic verses. And just be patient and listen. These scriptural verses that need to be unraveled before they could be understood, and that are protected by Allah. Now, why do we say this? Because the word hur is from the root hawara in Arabic, and it is often used with the concept of unraveling something. So when you talk about, for example, the scarf that a woman wraps around her head, or a man wraps around his head to protect himself or herself from the cold or from the sun, and then you come to unravel or unwrap that scarf, that's called hawara or hawr. Those verbs in Arabic mean to unravel. So in other words, the Quranic verses need to be unraveled. They are so packed with information and with insightful meaning that they need to be unpacked, and you need to be doing this in a careful, deliberate, disciplined manner according to the methodology of the Quran. And we're going to see in the next couple of minutes that the Quran describes how to do this. So it's absolutely not talking about virgin women or paradise or any of this stuff, as we shall see. Just be patient, as I said, and allow yourself the time to really appreciate the depth and the beauty of these meanings. So these scriptural Quranic verses need to be unraveled, unpacked before they could be understood. Now, fil khiyam, the word fil khiyam is often translated, again, wrong, in an ill-informed way, as if it's referring to tents. But if we go back to the tradition of our Prophet, our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as an example, not necessarily as an authoritative reference, but as an example of how the language gives us the imagery. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is narrated or reported to have said in a narration, الشهيد في خيمة الله, خيمة, tent. That's the literal Arabic meaning. But obviously it's an allegory. So what is it saying? Prophet ﷺ is saying the person who testifies to the truth, shaheed, he witnesses to the truth. He is willing to stand up and position himself as a true witness to truth, is shielded by the tent of Allah. That means, this is an expression in Arabic that when you are in my tent, you are in my house, you are protected by me. It is a representation of the fact that this person who testifies to the truth is protected by Allah, is under the protection of Allah. And it's a description, a beautiful allegorical description, metaphorical description of this person who testifies to the truth. And this word is khayma. So hurun maqsuratun fil khiyam. They're the verses that need to be unpacked, and they're under the protection of Allah. They're protected by Allah. Lam yatmithhunna. This is 2 verses later, because as you know, Surah Al-Rahman has a refrain that keeps repeating, so I skipped over 73. But 74 continues the description of the same concept. Lam yatmithhunna insun qablahum wala jan. These scriptural verses have never been corrupted, neither by a human nor a jinn. Now, I'm not going to talk about jinn today. We will discuss this concept, which is also misunderstood, in another video, inshallah. But for now, we will accept that these verses have never been corrupted. They have never been modified by a human being ever since their revelation to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this is the true meaning, the beautiful meaning that is implied by this. Now, you don't want to believe me. Let's look at another instance or another occurrence of the same word, hur. So in Surah Ad-Dukhan, chapter 44, same thing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is describing the disciplined interpreters, or those who work in a disciplined manner to apply the Quranic methodology to try to understand the Quran. That word for describing these people is al-muttaqun. I know it's been translated as pious ones, but pious, it's not wrong, but it's not specific enough. It's sort of a general word, the way it's translated. But in the Quran, it's a very specific, very precise term that means those who are disciplined in applying the methodology of the Quran. Al-muttaqun. It's a beautiful description. Those who are careful, who are very disciplined, they're very detailed, they're very peculiar in their interpretation. Those who are disciplined in applying the Quranic methodology enjoy a secure position. في مقام أمين. في جنات وعيون. Verse 52. They are secured in an understanding. Now here the word jannat, again, this has been misunderstood. The word jannah is derived from the verb jannah, and we see it in verse, as an example, I put an example in here, verse 676. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the exact same verb describing Ibrahim alayhi salam in Surah Al-An'am. Surah Al-An'am number 6, verse 76. The verse says, فَلَمَّا جَنَّ عَلَيْهِ اللَّيْلِ. When he was surrounded, completely surrounded by the darkness of the night. Ibrahim was reflecting in the middle of the night, and he was surrounded in the middle of the night in the darkness, and then he looked up and he saw the planet. That's the context of the verb Jannah. So Jannah, or with a ta, or Jannat, represents the areas or the abodes, or sort of the realms where you are sitting and understanding things, and you're surrounded, you're immersed. And it also represents a metaphorical image where you have access to this understanding, but others from outside do not see it. So after you've worked hard to get into this understanding, you are in the Jannah. This is a representation of the Jannah in the Quran. Of course, it means paradise in the hereafter. But in most cases where the word Jannah or Jannat occurs in the Quran, it's representing this concept, this private understanding that you've achieved or you've reached or you've been given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala after working hard to try to understand and interpret the verses of the Quran. Again, this is part of our methodology, and we follow the methodology in a very disciplined manner. So these pious, disciplined people enjoy an understanding. They are secure in their understanding. And this understanding flows from pure well springs. وَعُيُونٍ. They are with these well springs. They are enjoying these well springs. These well springs are shielded, يلبسون, they're covered, they're shielded, in authoritative references that are weaved together. They're connected to each other. They relate one verse to another. So it's describing these verses that are weaved, that connect to each other, and you have to work with them together, collectively. One verse from here, one verse from here, one verse from here, referring to the same concept. You put them together, and then suddenly you understand the overall concept. Or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you the understanding of the overall concept. And lightning flashes. This is a detailed concept that I'm not going to be able to get into, but the point is this understanding hits you as if it's a lightning. And those of you who have worked with math problems, who have worked on research, who have worked on trying to make new discoveries, they know exactly what it means. This is the aha moment. This is all of a sudden you see an idea in your mind that flashes, that comes out of nowhere, it seems. But that's guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This guidance occurs as if it's a lightning flash. So again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about this concept. And then it continues, these verses are coherent with each other. They're connected, they're weaved, they're linked to each other. You put them together, and all of them together collectively have to make sense. They have to be coherent. All of this concept now is described in verse 54. That's how these well springs and these verses and this understanding are paired to the scriptural verses. That the hur is a description of these verses that are packed. And they need to be unpacked. They need to be opened up and carefully analyzed in order to extract the meanings. So this is the concept of hur. It has nothing to do with the salacious, misogynistic interpretation about the virgin women who await those who kill people or whatever in paradise. It's absolutely not true. It is not worthy of the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This interpretation is a lot more, we hope, closer to the interpretation of the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The same verse, the same word occur in other verses, 52:20 and 56:22. In conclusion, I ask you that you attribute to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the reverence that is worthy of Him, that you think and reflect that the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot be accommodating to the misogynistic and limited mentality of some people who interpreted these verses in the wrong way. It is unfortunate that most Muslims today, and I will admit to this, misunderstand these verses. They have allowed the misinformed people, they have allowed the misogynistic people to limit the interpretation of the verses to some ugly concepts that have no relationship to the truth and no relationship to the fairness and the grandeur of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to keep us all on the straight path and to give us the guidance directly from Him so that we keep and remain connected with Him, and so that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to do what pleases Him all the time. Thank you for watching. Salamun alaykum.